For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. Matthew 18:20. We have 2 principles that guide these conversations. Principle 1, it is crucial for the well-being of LGBTQ individuals to be able to live in a space where their faith, spirituality, religion can coexist with their identity as LGBTQ. Forcing a choice between one or the other creates trauma and unhealthy emotional, relational, and spiritual patterns. Principle 2, there is value in encouraging spiritual practice and connection, inclusion, and spiritual community, even when individuals are not perfectly conforming with church norms.
Thank you, Carson. We have some opening music prepared for us by Rachel Pinto Martin, for who we're really grateful for that. And let's start with that.
Joy shall fill my heart, then I shall bow in humble adoration and there proclaim, my God, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art, how great thou art, how great thou art.
Thank you, Rachel. That was beautiful. Okay, so it is my pleasure to introduce Chris Kimball tonight. Chris and I was counting it up, go back at least 40 years. He was ahead of me in college, and still I consider him older and wiser. And he and his wife Linda and my husband Shipley and I have managed to follow each other around the country, and it's a really beautiful friendship. So I'll let Chris tell anything else he wants to say about his background, but we will go ahead and take it away, Chris. Chris, you're muted.
Thank you. Okay, I was starting to say, I understand from several different conversations that people actually have an interest in my background, and I will come back and answer questions if that is important. But I did want to only start with one comment along those lines. When I saw the write-up for this program, I think it's Erica's responsibility. She called me an ally, and I sort of choked up at that. She did that without consulting me, which actually makes it better, because I value that label, but I would never assume it. I would never take it on myself. And I think, I mean, we could have a long conversation about assuming that, but my relationship, if you will, to the LGBTQ community is not really a relationship with a community. It is a relationship with my friends. In the 1990s, it seemed for a while that all of my best friends were gay, turned out to be gay. But I learned that by way of divorce, by way of AIDS, by way of church discipline, not by way of someone coming out or by way of big issues in their lives, but in the lives of people I cared about. But it was my friends dying, my friends being disciplined, my friends divorcing, and that's my history. Those are my friends, and that's why I care. Okay. Talking about my book, a place Erica suggested starting is with back in 1976. In 1976, in July of 1976, I returned from a mission in South Korea. In November 1976, at Thanksgiving, I got engaged. In December, I was back in Provo, fretting about that engagement, wondering whether that was the right thing, whether this was a good thing to do. And I went to the Provo Temple, the wedding cake temple, the one across from the MTC. And I just barely missed a session with a mission friend. So I ended up alone in a crowd in an endowment session in the temple. And I was there in the sort of classic praying and meditating and thinking, what about this marriage business, and what should I do, and is this engagement a good thing? And I had a vision that is visual, audible, words in my head, and the words are important. The words were, here are some things to think about. Now you figure it out. Step back a few years, 1972, when Linda Hoffman went to her bishop to ask him for advice about whether she should transfer from her college, Wellesley College, for her senior year to transfer to BYU. And he told her, no, I think you should stay. She then pushed back to say, was that one of those inspired things, or are you just making it up? And he stopped. To his credit, he stopped and thought about that and said, I think this is one of those inspired things. Now, the end of that story, if you want to tell it as a faith-promoting story, is that in the spring of 1977, Linda and I were both unattached single adults in the university ward in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where we met and dated and ultimately married. And we are still here today, and there's Linda on the screen. Now, stop and think about that story in terms of what it might look like if you were filming it, if you were making a movie. The visuals are stock visuals. You could probably go down to the church distribution center and buy, visuals of somebody sitting in the temple, somebody sitting across from her bishop asking a question. The setting is absolutely stock Mormon tradition practice, but the words are not. The words are new words. The pushback to the bishop, are you making it up or is this inspired? That's not the way we grew up thinking about how we talk with bishops. It's a smart way to deal with a bishop, but it's not standard language. The words I heard in the temple, here are some things to think about. Now you figure it out. That's not stock language. Now, none of those words are in this book, but the ethos, the sense of this story is the framing of the whole book. It is stock Mormon practice. We're not doing anything about changing the church, fixing the church, practicing in a different way. Sacrament meeting looks just like sacrament meeting. Everything that bugs you about the church still bugs you about the church. What we're changing is the narrative. What we're changing is the way we talk about it, the way we as individuals deal with our bishops, with our stake presidents, with the institution, with the way a calling comes, with how the temple operates. We're changing the narrative and not changing the way the church operates or the church works. That all turns out to be important framing. That is, for this book, the positioning is that a reader understands that living with the church or living with the church community is stressful, is problematic, is difficult, is challenging at times or all the time, and yet wants to have a continued relationship of some sort. That's something that I expect readers to bring to the book. We don't spend a lot of time talking about what are the problems, why you might find it challenging. I mean, for most people who come to the book, that's just obvious. And I have a long list myself. It's just not what we talk about in this book. And I'll mention that turns out to be important. We don't talk about why you might want to have a continued relationship. I do talk about a number of reasons people find, but it's not a pitch that you should, not a demand, not an apologist argument that this is the right thing or the good thing. The whole storyline is open to the possibility that there may someday be a last straw, that may be that you choose to leave. That's one of the possibilities on the table. By the end of the book, it should be a question mark. There should be a question mark about what leaving might mean and what staying might mean, which frankly goes to an important part of the title. So the title is Living on the Inside of the Edge, a Survival Guide. And the edge refers to the idea that you're troubled sometimes, that it's difficult sometimes. The inside of the edge refers to the idea that you are looking in, that you have an interest in a continued relationship of some sort. The living part of the title grew out of the writing, in fact. That is, I started this book thinking that it was a process of dealing with a temple recommend interview, or dealing with the bishop the next time he calls you in and asks you to do something or tells you not to do something. That it was a story of critical moments, of difficult interactions. But as I developed and as it grew from sort of from the middle out, became more and more a topic or a question or a discussion of how do you make a life work? How do you do this for an extended period of time, for 10 years, for 20 years, for 25 years, for a lifetime? And therefore it becomes not crisis management, but lifestyle, life decisions, life choices. And finally, I want to just touch on the word survival. It's a survival guide. Survival guide does two jobs, two works in the title. One is to communicate that the message here or the outcome here is not do it my way, think about things my way, and all will be well. You'll be happy and life will go on. The word survival is to say, it's still tough. This is hard. And as we're talking about efforts and work on the edge in difficult times, we're not talking about happy, everybody making it happy and successful. I would like to believe that some people end up thriving, but that's a next book, if you will, a someday book, thriving on the inside of the edge. This is a survival guide. The other thing that it communicates, and now we'll get back to me a little bit, is that I am a survivor. My story as a multi-generation Mormon, about as inside an insider as you could possibly be, as a grandson of President Spencer W. Kimball, as baptized by my father on my 8th birthday in Lake Wingra with my mother as the only witness, and on it goes. Every box you can check until mid-90s, when serving as a bishop, I came in real tension with the church. And after I was released as a bishop, I turned in my temple recommend on the determination that I could no longer sit for a worthiness interview, for a temple recommend interview, or any other kind of worthiness interview. And I just haven't. That's more than 25 years now, that my life in the church is on the edge, if you will, in anybody's definition of edge. That is, I go to church on Sunday. Sometimes, I mean, COVID has really thrown that for a loop as to what you say when you say, do I attend church, and how often? But I attend church. I have had callings. I teach gospel doctrine sometimes, and then sometimes I don't. But I don't have temple recommend. I have not participated in any kind of leadership calling. I have not sat for a worthiness interview for more than 25 years now. And in that way, I am the embodiment. I am a survivor on the edge of the church, in a community that is mine. That's my people. I mean, I am Mormon through and through, as core, as deeply as one can be, and yet living on the edge. So how did this book come about? And then I'll tell you a little bit about what the book says, and then I'd like to have some opportunity for questions and answers. I have come up with 4 or 5 different origin stories, but I think the neatest packaging story starts in 2015, when we discovered when Aaron Brown, a friend of mine, disclosed to the world the exclusion policy. And I'm not sure. No, he's public about being the person who put it out there. The exclusion policy was devastating for me. There's a chapter in this book about that experience. There's a poem that Linda wrote that includes some reflections on my reaction. It was a difficult time. A group of friends gathered in our living room, and we had a discussion about what are we going to do about this. And among those friends, some of them left the church. Some of them left activity completely. One of my friends decided to have, as she said, this ward, our local ward is progressive. It's a good place. I like the people. It's working for me. I will have nothing more to do with the Salt Lake, church office building, church, or even at the stake level. But the ward is a place I can continue to participate, and that's what I'll do. And that's where she is today. My own determination was that I am already so far out on the edge. There's not much meaning to stepping further away. And another kind of thought that crossed my mind was the next place I might stop. The next place I know best is the Catholic Church, and in this particular context, that's sort of like frying pan into the fire kind of move. So that's not attractive either. So I decided to pretty much stay where I was, but I made a commitment to myself that I would speak up, that I would not be a silent bystander. And that was a shift for me. I mean, I had for maybe 15 years quieted myself, not shut down completely, but I didn't speak up at church unless I had an assignment. But the determination was, whatever they do to me, whatever they think about me, I'm going to speak up. That's actually led to some wonderful things. It's led to writing a book. It's led to writing some essays that got me attention in some conversations. And it's probably the thing that led to saying some things that then Erica would turn around and call me an ally. So take those comments full circle. And I actually think that's probably the right way to think about it. It also led to a few months later, a man named Steve Evans, who not coincidentally is the founder of BCC Press, writing a note to me. He said, our friends are leaving the church and I don't like it. We need to write a book. The book didn't happen then. Steve and I didn't write it together. I wrote it. Most of the actual writing happened over the COVID period. It's my work, my guilt and my pleasure, but it's and I guess Steve takes some responsibility, because he said in the first place we need to write a book, and he ended up publishing it. So that you can't step away from it completely, but it is all it's all on my head, put it that way. Except for the fact that I reached out in the process of writing to, well, a dozen or more people, and to ask them to write an essay with a kind of a long introduction, or maybe even drafts of this book, to say, here's what I'm doing, this is what we're talking about, and I want your voice. I want your point of view. I want your voice. I reached out to Susan Meredith Hinckley, who wrote an essay on the women's viewpoint. I reached out to James Jones, who wrote an essay on a black man's point of view. I reached out to David Doyle, who wrote from an LGBTQ point of view, and more. Now, I'd like to take lots of credit, platforming people who don't have the opportunity to publish a whole book is the right thing to do. That's the right thing to do. I was in fact aware of that. But most of all, I wanted these voices where I knew they were not mine. I thought I could make up an essay about women's role in the church, and I would probably get the logic right. I've been around the block a few times, but I could not get the voice right. I couldn't get the emotion. I couldn't get the impact right, and I wanted that. I wanted those points of view. I love the essays. I encourage everybody to read them. They're in the fourth section of the book, so sometimes people don't get that far. There's an interesting reaction that comes up very often, and I say this to encourage you all, if you have a chance to pick up the book and read it yourself, to pay attention to those essays. The common reaction that dozens, at least a dozen people have come back to me and said, I read your part of the book, good stuff. I'm thinking about that. I read the essays, they're good, they belong there. I'm glad you did that. And there was one essay that for me was the whole book. You could have just published that essay and it would be, it was the whole message right there. Or why did you bury that? Why didn't you just put that in chapter 1? Those are the kinds of comments. What's interesting is it's not all the same essay. It's not like there's one essay that stands out. Everybody who comes back to me with that kind of comment has picked out a different essay. Sometimes it's because it's reflective of their own experience. No, it's an LGBTQ person reading David Doyle's essay, or it's a woman reading Susan Meredith Hinckley's essay and saying, that's me, that's an expression of my life. Sometimes it's almost the opposite. It's a, wow, that one took me back because I had no idea how bad it is. I had no idea how hard it is. And it opened my eyes to something I hadn't seen before. So, all those reactions, some of the reactions are, I went away and cried for 3 days. It just affected me so strongly. Read the essays, and I could give you a pitch for each one of them. But I won't, not tonight. We may come back to them in the Q&A, and then I'll tell you, well, go ask the author. They're available, they're accessible. So before moving to a Q&A, I thought, and Erica suggested I do my sort of elevator pitch on what the book is, what the book teaches, what the message is of the book. It's an elevator pitch in 4 parts. And I kind of hesitate to do it because in order to do this as an elevator pitch, you have to do single sentences for something that I think sometimes takes 1,000 or 3,000 words to really explain. But the first issue, the first big point is grow up. The principle is that churches and the Mormon Church, as much as any other, operates on a parent-child model. And if we let ourselves stay in that model, as children being told what to do by the church as parent, that's for any of us who are struggling on the inside of the edge, that's a ultimately fail. That's a place that ultimately fails. That is, remaining in a child to parent relationship is a place where you either get so fed up that you just leave, separating and divorcing yourself from your parents, if you will, or you just squash everything that you think and believe and say, yes, sir. And both of those are not conducive to living on the inside of the edge. So the first principle is grow up, become an adult in this relationship, engage with your bishop in an adult to adult conversation, one that says, I know what you are talking about. You may know what I'm talking about. Let's have a real conversation about what I can do, what you can do, about boundaries, about what I believe. I'm not dependent on you approving of me. I'm here because I want to be in this conversation. All those kinds of things are the grow up. Second big principle, which just flows through the whole book, is break the binaries. Everywhere you see an in or out, you're in or out, it's true or it's false. You're a good person or you're a bad person. You're going to heaven or you're going to hell. Stop and break it up. There are middle ways. There are alternatives. There is nuance everywhere. And those binaries are killers. Those binaries all force us into, well, if I'm not all in, then I guess I'm out. And if I'm sinning a little, I'm going to hell. If I'm not following every principle, I'm out of, I'm so out of touch. There's only exaltation in celestial kingdom, or what, or nothing, or hell. That's Mormon language. We're changing the language here. We're changing the language, and the language has to break the binaries. The third principle is to deal with your magical thinking. And it would be nice to say get rid of your magical thinking, but I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that's the way people really work. But deal with your magical thinking. And that takes another sentence or two. By magical thinking, I do not mean stop praying, stop believing in miracles, stop having spiritual experiences. What I mean is deal with the places where you want or demand or ask for certainty, where you're wanting the sure thing, where you have if I do this, then they will give me a prize. If I go to church every Sunday, then I will get the new job. Or, I mean, there's a dozen different ways that, and this is very common in religion generally. This is not just Mormon, but it's very common to have the idea that we, a desire for certainty, a checklist of if I do this, then I will get that. And real life doesn't work that way. What I believe about the world and what I believe about us as people, as human beings, is that we want certainty, but we, over time as adults experiencing the real world and watching people die and watching people fail and watching people not get what they asked for, is that it doesn't work. And over again, the disappointment when it doesn't work, when you have counted on something, when you have played the certainty game and you lose, leads people to leaving their church, to leaving God, to leaving any sense of religion. It's a destructive experience. And I'm preaching that we should deal with it in advance. We should work through our demands and interests and desires for certainty, for the if-then propositions that too much of religious preaching tells us is out there. If you fast and pray, you will get an answer. If you get a priesthood blessing, you will rise and walk again. And sometimes it doesn't happen. The last principle, although I could mix it up and call it two principles, but the last principle is to move into a wisdom practice as contrasted with an obedience practice. The childlike version of religion is obey. The adult version of religion is be wise, learn and think and evaluate and make decisions and understand that you never get the sure thing and that you will always be uncertain, that it is a rocky walk, that Christ will be with us, but will not give us certainty. That's a wisdom practice as opposed to an obedience practice. And that's one place to end. I guess the other, call it a fifth principle or a 4 prime, is to approach this all as a life, as a lifestyle, as principles of life, not as crisis management, but as a, how do I want to live my life? As an adult, what does adult spirituality mean to me? How do I deal with a church which is an other? How do I want to live my life? Erica, I think I hit all the points you asked me to talk about. You know that I could go on for 2 more hours, but I'd rather take time for questions and answers now than keep talking.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. Okay, let's stop the recording and open it up for question and answer, and you can